Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Matt Williamson of Pop Goes the 60s, and today I have back with me Jude Kessler, a very popular guest I've had in the past. Welcome, Jude.
Thank you so much, Matt, for having me back. I have to tell you, I've been doing umpteen million podcasts since this all started 30 some odd years ago. And I have never, in all the podcasts that I've done, had so many people come up to me at the Fest for Beatles fans and say, "Hey, I saw you on Matt Williamson's podcast." It is unbelievable. And I would say at the Jersey Fest just a few weeks ago, I think that was the way everybody started his or her conversation. I mean, really
Wow.
and truly, I was like, oh my gosh, you are vastly popular.
Well, the channel is growing, and I'm glad to see that. That's great feedback because I actually don't hear that other than I get comments on my channel, but they after a while just it gets to just to be comments. It's not like actual humans coming up to me. I've never been recognized on the street yet, so that'll be that'll maybe be the telltale sign.
Well, if you come to the Chicago Fest and they get to see you in person, you know.
Yes, are you going to that one? You were still up in
Oh
the air
yeah.
on that one, weren't you?
Oh yeah,
You
yeah.
are
No,
going.
I'm definitely going and I'm excited. It's going to be, the Jersey Fest was the most packed I think the fest has been in 10 years. It
Mm,
really harkened back to the 2000s when people were just, you couldn't get on an elevator. You were waiting to get up to a desk to buy a book. It was busy.
wow.
The main ballroom, which, was huge. There wasn't a chair. I had to stand for several of the things.
Wow.
So yeah, it last year it was slow go because people were reticent about coming back. You weren't sure. The COVID still lingered in the background. This year, everybody was just out there having a wonderful time. So,
Well, that's great. I'm going to be very non-committal about the Chicago Festival only because I've got this marriage thing coming in about a week and a half, and we've got some business to do over the summer as well. So it'll be a game time decision probably. We'll talk.
yeah.
We'll talk.
Okay. Okay. I wish both of you would come. It would be great to meet both of you in person.
Well, I think I could convince Heather to come. She likes seeing this kind of stuff, and she's been real supportive of this channel. And I bounce ideas off of her, even though 60s music isn't her thing. But she's slowly becoming. Boy, she learned a lot about the Beatles during that whole Get Back thing. She learned a
Yeah.
lot because I was doing a lot of videos on the topic, and she was a great sport about it.
Yeah. Y'all need to do, but the week before, do an anthology night and pop popcorn in each night, watch a little bit of it. Then she'll be
Yes,
just ready to join the fray, as
exactly.
it were.
Well, you're right in the middle of the fray. You've got some audiobooks you're doing now. Last time you were on, we talked about your 5 volumes of John Lennon, and you are busy working on volume 6. But what's interesting is you started doing some audio versions of your books, and with a very special guest helping you out do that. So why don't you explain what your new venture is on that?
Yeah, this was something that was not at all on my radar. It's not something that I thought about doing, but last year in the early part of the summer, Jay Bergen published Lennon, the Mobster, and the Lawyer. And I didn't really know what the book was about, but any John Lennon book, I'm game. I want to see if this is going to have some new material. And Scott McKinley, who did the narration for Jay's book, sent me a complimentary link to the audiobook. And I thought, well, I don't really listen to a lot of audiobooks, don't have time. I mean, I'm constantly working. I thought, but I have to go outside for an hour every night and hand water the hundreds and hundreds of potted plants that are out on our patio. And I thought, I'll listen to it then. And after night number one, I was hooked. I mean, literally hooked, because not only is Jay Bergen's book brand new material that Beatles fans have never heard before, because he was John's attorney in the trial against mobster Morris Levy. Levy, I'm sure took John's rudimentary tapes for the rock and roll LP, and without asking his permission, made it into an album of his own called Roots. He didn't do anything to it. He didn't let John have any input on what songs were to go first, third, fourth, sixth. He didn't master the tapes. He just put it out there like K-Tel, or, it was the worst of the worst junk that he put out there. And I guess he thought John would just roll over and do nothing. But John got an attorney and sued him. And so Jay goes to court with John, and they have hundreds of hours of courtroom testimony that John gives on how he orders songs on a record. Well, how does he make a decision? What's going to be first? What's going to be second? How does he do this? What is his creative process in recording a song? How does he engineer and master a song? What are his favorite songs? What do the songs mean to him? This is stuff nobody's ever heard before. It's all brand new. So I'm excited about that. But what I'm even more excited about is the guy reading the book, because Scott McKinley wasn't just some guy trying to do John Lennon. I mean, and doing a pretty good job, a passable job. Yeah, people do. You can kind of tell they're doing John, but
sure,
it's not quite right.
Right.
This guy is freaking John Lennon. And he's like, he does everything. He's got John's nuances. He's got his little laugh. He's got his way of saying, anytime John said no, he never just goes no. He goes, nah, no. It's his thing. He's chewing gum when he's talking like John. He has captured him. So I started to get butterflies in my stomach, and I thought, wait a minute. And I wrote to him and I said, do you do Paul? And he goes, well, yeah, of course. My Paul may be better than my John. I'm like, what? Do you do George? He goes, George is my favorite. I said, how about Ringo? And he goes, I'm not great at Ringo, but I'm a voices student, and I can study, and I can learn to do Ringo. I said, well, I've got this book for you. It's a monster. Let's see, where did I put it? It was the whole, here it is. It is 820 pages. And it is the most exciting part of the Beatles' journey, because it's 1963 and the first 2 months of 64, when they're on Ed Sullivan and Carnegie Hall and all that good stuff, Washington, D.C. concert. Do you think you could do it as an audiobook? He goes, well, let me look at it. So I sent him a copy. 2 weeks later, he writes me back and he goes, okay, Jude, number one, I've figured it up. I think it's going to take 30 hours of recording. It's going to be a 30-hour audiobook. It turned out to be 33. And there are 183 famous people in it whose voices I have to learn.
Oh, wow.
Sid Bernstein, Ed Sullivan, Trini Lopez, Bobby Goldsboro, Roy Orbison, not to mention Tony Barrow and Neil Aspinall and Mal Evans and the Beatles and Cynthia and Mimi and Cynthia's mother Lillian and Fred Lennon. And he said, this is going to be like a mammoth undertaking, but I want to do it more than words can say. But you've got to give me a month at least, because I have to research one of these voices. I have to go on YouTube. I have to study their voices. I have to get the nuances. I have to learn each one of these voices. So we did that. And then he came back to me and said, I think you should read the end notes, because that's you telling about what happened in the chapter and how people can't agree about these topics. And you're saying what Bill Harry says this, Mark Lewison says this, Hunter Davies says this. You should read that part. Would you be willing to do it? And some of the notes are longer than the chapter.
Oh, really? Wow.
I mean, like, we'll have a 3-page chapter. We'll have 4 pages of notes, because I'm telling you the controversies. So I said, yeah, I'll do that. So we started working on it. It took us 8 months of working together. And once he had a chapter recorded, then my husband would sit here every night and we would listen to the chapter and write down, this word wasn't quite right. Like the one we laugh about now is he said coif for coif. And I said, it's a coiffure, it's a hairstyle, it's short for coiffure. He's in the Paris chapter. He said, I'm never going to France ever, because I can't pronounce anything right. But towards the end, he was a total Frenchman. He had mastered everything. So we would do that. We'd send him the note backs. He'd re-record it. He would record the Beatles on different tracks so that he could put them together and let them overlap each other in press conferences or when they were in the studio. You know, thanks to John C. Wynne, we know exactly what they said in the studio because he took all the tapes and gave them all a transcription that we could use. So a lot of times they're using all their original verbiage, and they're talking and they're overlapping and they're laughing and they're making jokes. When they make the Christmas record, he even sang. We had to get an attorney in London because when they sing Good King Wenceslas, we're like, are we going to get in trouble for this? And they're like, no, there's no. Good King Wenceslas was written hundreds of years ago. You don't need to worry about it. But it is so alive, Matt, that I mean, I know this thing, even though it's been, you know, probably 8 years since I wrote that book or more. I still remember all the research and all the words, but when he would use John's voice and Cynthia's voice and act out these scenes, I mean, I was just crying. I mean, you're there. I just, my dream of life has been to find a time machine and go back to the cavern and be there that last night that they performed on those boards in August of 1963 and be there for that night. And I got to do it thanks to Scott McKinley. So it's been a journey.
Well, using Scott really seems to bring your books to life, and your books already had a lot of life. And those people that don't know about Jude's work, there's a lot of dialogue in there that is. How would you describe your writing in terms of the dialogue?
It's written as a narrative, but I use the words that they actually said. There are over 4,000 footnotes in the book. So what they eat, they ate. What they wear, and in the case of John Lennon, it would be the same thing for about 5 days, and then he'd switch outfits. That's his way. What they wear, they wore. What they say, they said. What they did, and I talk about, you know, here's what someone says they did, here's what the other person says they did, trying to get to the grain of the truth. We may never know on some of these incidents, but we talk extensively about exactly what happened, because since I tell it as a narrative and you're there and it's unfolding, you know, moment by moment, I don't want people to think, oh, she's making this up, or this is historical fiction. No, this is what happened, but I'm letting you see it as a story. But I'm really careful to do the research. You and I were talking a couple of days ago about the Elvis chapter in the new book that I'm working on right now. It took me 3 months to research, 75 typed pages of notes, and hundreds and hundreds of discrepancies in all the people who were there tell the story a different way. They all tell it a different way. So I try to make sure that we dot every I and cross every T, and that I'm not giving someone something that's not true.
Well, that's what makes doing the history of the Beatles so difficult, because so much has been written on them. And that you use the meeting of Elvis as a good example. How you've got just multiple different stories told by different writers. And as writers interpret a little bit, things get changed and things get exaggerated and blown up and enlarged. And we've got, I don't know how many different accounts of the Elvis story there are, but I know that they address that pretty well in the anthology. One of the best things about the anthology series that the Beatles did in 95 was the fact that they did show a lot of discrepancies between what they remembered. They talk about an incident, and they record each person answering what they thought went on, and it was completely different. And the Elvis incident was one of those.
Yeah, it is, because John has a list. It's in the anthology of every song that they played with Elvis. He's quite specific about what they played, starting off with Cilla Black's "You're My World." And the reason for that is when they were on Ed Sullivan just a few days before that, Cilla was on as well. And she performed it. So Elvis is in a way saying to them, I watched you on Ed Sullivan by choosing that as the first song. You know, it's kind of a nice way of saying, look, I know what you just did. I'm aware. Okay. And then he goes into every song that they sang. Paul also tells you what they sang And it's a completely different list. Ringo doesn't comment. He says that they jammed, but that he was playing drums on a chair because they didn't have any drums. And after the first song, he got up and went to play snooker with Neil and Mal and a bunch of Elvis's people. But another version, told by Mal Evans, says that they came in and brought Ringo a pair of bongos, and he stayed and played bongos. Ivor Davis says that they may have offered him a tambourine, but that he left to go play roulette. Everybody's got a different version of the story. And George says, we never jammed with Elvis. And maybe John did, but I didn't. Well, that's because George didn't hang around. George got up and went outside looking for a reefer. And he was really frustrated because this Memphis Mafia they're not reefer smoking guys. They have lots of bourbon if you want bourbon. They got good Tennessee bourbon, Kentucky bourbon. They never reefer. So he's not in the room. There's so many folds in this story. John Allnight is speaking in this silly accent. There you are, he says to Elvis, and this is cozy, the singing of the songs. And when he leaves, long live the king. And people are like, what was wrong with him? Why was he doing that? Well, because number one, he says, I'm nervous as hell. We were all nervous as hell. He just watched either, depending on who you listen to, Cat Ballou, or what I think it was, What's New Pussycat. And he's doing this Peter Sellers imitation. He always does goon voices all the time. He's nervous. So he's falling back on this persona, and he talks like that all night. Why he's doing it, he's just nervous. That's all I can tell you. And there's just so many different. Some people say the TV was on, but the sound was down. Other people say Elvis records were playing on the jukebox. Some people say Beatles records were playing on the jukebox. There's so many different ways of telling the story, depending on whether you're with the Memphis Mafia, you're with the Beatles, you're the press. I sent Mark Lewis in my notes, and he wrote back to me and said, I don't know whether to laugh or cry over this. This is a ridiculous amount of contradictions. It's crazy.
Yeah, and luckily, meeting of Elvis, we know that it took place. Is it that important what actually happened there? I guess that's ultimately isn't that big of a deal. It seems like they had a nice little time together, and that was it. But yeah, it's funny when you hear all the different accounts, which tells you that if we had to rely just on the four Beatles for history, we'd get the worst history probably that we've gotten yet.
Yeah. Well, as John Lennon famously said, I may forget a lot of things, but I remember the day I met Paul. It was in July of 1957. Really? I mean, he doesn't remember days. He doesn't remember. The closest he can get is maybe giving you a month, but it was in the summer. It might have been in the spring. Even Cynthia, in her first book, A Twist of Lennon, puts her wedding date wrong. Her wedding date is a year off. Wow. And historiography, which is what I majored in college, tells you that there are about 7 factors that causes history to morph and change. And one of them, of course, is just confusion. You don't remember when things occurred. You remember that they occurred, but you don't remember when they occurred. For example, in Cynthia's first book, she has the Beatles go to America for the North American tour and then come back from the North American tour and make A Hard Day's Night. That these two things in her mind were right together. They went to America for the February trip. When they got home from the February trip, the Ed Sullivan trip, then they made A Hard Day's Night. Then they go on the North American tour. But, people just don't remember. So confusion is one thing. But sometimes someone says something, and I think this is the case with the Beatles a lot, and it gets repeated, and it gets repeated, and it gets repeated. and then you can't get rid of it. It was an error to begin with. But so many people have said it that they don't want to change it and they want to cling to it because it's their little bit of history. Sometimes people insert themselves into stories because they want to be part of it. And sometimes people just like to embellish because they want to make it more exciting. I was in Liverpool, and this was like 1994. It was my second trip to Liverpool, and we were in the Grapes. And one of the tour guides from the tavern tours says to me, "Do you know the story about the Beatles and the Odd Spot Club?" And I said, "No, I don't think I know that one." He goes, "Well, they were in there having a drink. So far, I believe him. And they're standing at the bar. I'm still with him. And Paul puts the toe of his shoe down. And when he does, the bottom of the shoe shows, and there's a price tag still on it." Okay, I believe that. And he says, and people started making fun of him because they're like, "Oh, showing off your new shoes. Oh, price tag." Yeah, I believe that too. That's Scousers. And Paul gets so mad that he hit someone. Okay, now we're in fantasy land, because Paul. Paul is, if anything, amiable, congenial, easy to get along with. He's not going to hit someone for teasing him about his shoe. And a young American jumped in to save him. And it was, guess who? Bill Clinton. Okay. Bill Clinton's president at this time. It's 1994. So he's telling me a story he thinks that I, as American, want to hear. People like to embellish, and you've got to be careful, even when you're listening to people who were there, because they want to embellish. Sometimes it is to make money, sadly. Bill Harry said, here's a quote from Bill Harry. This is a good example. In the book that Albert Goldman created, we find the ridiculous and completely unfounded story that Stewart died as a result of John kicking him in the head in Hamburg. In the interview in Beatles Unlimited magazine, Pauline Sutcliffe was asked about Goldman's fantasy, and she said it was, and here's a direct quote, "utter rubbish and completely untrue," end quote. However, Bill Harry goes on, when a ghostwriter took over to write her third book, The Beatles' Shadow, up popped this story about John kicking Stewart in the head, with Pauline now claiming the incident she had previously denied as being untrue was true. And lo and behold, her book was serialized in the Daily Mail.
Yeah, that's a good example of somebody who it was a really shameful act on her part to lie like that. And there's a lot of other evidence on top of that as well. And she kind of recanted later because she had to, because she looked like a fool. Yeah. But it made, as if John Lennon needs more help looking bad. But that is it doesn't make sense. He's going to kick his best friend in the head. It doesn't make any sense. No. And for her to all of a sudden come up with this story is just somebody who's a huckster and, looking and trying to make a buck. And to make a buck that way is pretty shitty. Yeah,
it's exoneration, condemnation, and it totally, I see it a lot with John Lennon, because if you go through the 1964 North American tour and you go through the press conferences, there are some snarky comments made by George, and George is being funny. People don't understand. George is that's just George's nature. Like when he said to George Martin, when George Martin gave him that little lecture about, if you're going to record with EMI, you're going to be on time, you're going to wear nice clothes, you're going to act professional, blah, blah, blah. Is there anything that you don't like? And George says, yes, I don't like your tie. He's just being snarky funny, And in 1964, he makes several comments to the reporters that they don't like, and they come across as kind of snarky. And immediately the next day, they're in the newspaper as something John Lennon said. And he would have to call Mimi and go, I didn't say it. It wasn't me. It was George, So I don't know whether his aunt believed him or not. But once you get a reputation of being the troublemaker, everything is blamed on you.
And it's believable.
Yeah.
And it seems believable. Could be But yeah, it's a shame that at least the good thing about where we sit now with the internet, with YouTube, with all these different places that allow us to check things easily. Yes, you can perpetuate things much quicker that are untrue, but you can certainly set things right a lot easier too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
discredit the people that have been lying to us ever since and telling their tall tales and bringing
Right.
their heavy bias, the Philip Normans of the world. We have to hear how wonderfully flowing his books are. That's great, but it's in fact the problem. It's not true. Every
And
single page he rips on. Anytime he brings up Paul McCartney, he rips on him every time, and
yeah,
it's just
it's like
it's
Here, There, and Everywhere by Jeff Emmerich. I think, oh, I can show you it sitting right here. And I love Jeff. And I was lucky to meet him and interview him. And he, his book is a prime source. You got someone who was actually there. But written on the very first page of my book is, this man hates George Harrison.
Did you write that, or did he write that?
Yeah, I
You
wrote
wrote that.
it.
Okay.
Yeah, because he
Mhm.
hates him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
every
and this
page
is
is how no good he is.
yeah,
Really.
that's one of those instances where Jeff Emmerich, he's a bit of a little bitch because he can't leave his personal feelings out of it. Now, my
Right.
understanding is George Harrison was the instigator of all this that pissed Jeff Emmerich off, but
Yeah.
Jeff Emmerich responded in his book and got it back in the book. Now, this is
Yeah.
just childish. This is child's play. And then people insist that Emmerich is just this infallible writer, like speaking from the chair. He is not.
No.
And he should be taken to the woodshed for it as well. Now, there's
Yeah.
very good stuff in it as well. He's got some
Great
reliable
stuff.
stuff where
Great.
he doesn't have a bias. But why should we have to do the work to figure that out? It's because
Yeah.
they're too immature and too undisciplined and too poor of writers. They
Yeah.
have
Well, he really, you after about page 20, you know it. And so
yeah.
you expect it. And, he talks about when they were recording the backwards lead guitar part from I'm Only Sleeping, and how it took
Mhm.
8 hours and George couldn't get it. And it was a waste of time. And why do we have to put up with this? And blah, 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 blah. And you're like, okay, enough. I got it. You don't like him, but you have to be careful because history is slippery, and you have to look at even primary sources and say, okay, they had an agenda. Let's take Hunter Davies in the Beatles. So in the book that we released is the audiobook, and She Loves You, Volume 3. It begins with Brian and John on holiday on the Costa del Brava and the Costa del Sol in Spain for 14 days. And Hunter Davies does not even mention that they took the trip. He says they, meaning the Beatles, they went to Tenerife on holiday. So he makes it look like John went with the others on holiday. He did not. He went with Brian on holiday. But because it is the early 1960s, and being at that time what they call homosexual at that time was illegal, I mean, you could be arrested. He does not even mention that Brian and John take a holiday together because they don't want any overtones that this might have been something related to Brian being gay. Okay, well, 10 years later, that looks ridiculous. You're like, why did you omit it? That looks ridiculous. But back when he wrote that book, it was important. So there's so many reasons that people change history.
Yeah, and that's why they say it takes 50 years for the dust to settle before you can really write it more accurately.
That's
And
right.
that's where we're at now with the Beatles. It took all this time to really, and I think most of us just assumed, well, this is just writer. I mean, for a long period, there wasn't a lot of questioning of what was right or wrong or what agendas were or what biases are there, just because you're just soaking it all up. It was too close to the time period.
Right.
But now with all this hindsight and a lot of the pretenders and the grifters have been exposed, you can start to piece together what is more reliable and what is unreliable.
Right. And then sometimes, depending upon the way people like or dislike a character, the story gets larger and larger as time goes along. Sometimes they become more forgiving and more understanding and more accepting. Sometimes they become more condemning. And we talked about the incident at Paul's birthday party when John, after being teased for about 2 months about going on holiday with Brian, it started off kind of gently, and then people started talking to him about the Spanish honeymoon, and oh, you had bayonet practice, and they had all these things they said. The more they did it, the madder he got. And Cynthia kept saying to him, they know you've got me. You had lots of girlfriends before me. I don't understand. He's like, you don't understand. They keep saying this about me. And he got madder and madder and madder and madder. So we get finally to Paul's birthday party, and you've got this little boy who never had a birthday party. His Mimi never gave him a birthday party. On his 21st birthday, he gets money from his aunt, who gives him enough that he and Paul slip away and go to Paris for a few days. That's pretty big. I mean, that's cool. They actually went to Paris. They were supposed to meet Stu there, but Stu is too sick to show up. So Jürgen Vollmer shows up, and they hang around with him and see Johnny Halliday and do some other cool things like getting their hair cut into that Beatle cut finally. But it's not a party. It's not family. It's not people loving him. It's him. It's just going off on his own. So he goes to Paul's birthday party, and it's at Auntie Jen's house. They've got this huge striped, pink and white striped tent set up. There's a cake that's bigger than a wedding cake. There are presents all over this table. All the Merseyside bands are there performing. Jim Mack gets up and does a set and sings to his son. It couldn't be more family love. So there's John, who has to go off on his own and doesn't get any birthday parties. And there's Paul, who gets everything you could ever want for a birthday party. And he's jealous. He is so jealous. He can barely stand it. And everybody's teasing him at the party about Brian. And, oh, you're with a girl this time because you bring Cynthia to the party. That's something new. And he's getting drunker and drunker and madder and madder. And then Bob Wooler shows up. And look, Bob picks on everybody. He said to me, oh, so you're the lady lionizing Lennon. And he gave me a test that I had to take before, 10 questions, before he would even give me an interview. And Bob liked to pick. He just liked to tease, and he loved alliteration. He loved to say things that, were funny and witty. And John wasn't in the mood for anything funny and witty. And he said something to him. I said, Bob, could you tell me what you said? I would love to put exactly what you said. He's like, I am never repeating that again. I am taking that to the grave with me. But he said something not great, because John pretty much, he beat him up. I mean, let's not lie about it. He beat him up, and if you knew Bob Wooler, Bob is not a beating up kind of guy. He likes to pick, but he can't hit. And John pretty much smashed him up. He had bruised ribs. He had to get a couple of stitches. And Brian insisted he go to the hospital because he wanted this taken care of. And immediately Brian insisted he was going to take care of any medical, he was going to take care of everything, which he did. Beryl Adams, who was married to Bob at that time, said that she didn't go to the party, but she said when he came home, he was bruised and he was sore, and he was going to never be around John again, which of course he was. They were around each other several times after that. But by the time it gets to Goldman in the 90s, John is picking up a shovel and beating him with a shovel. The story kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So, I mean, I don't believe anybody about anything. If someone says something, I respect them. I know that they're trying to tell me the best truth that they knew at that time in history, but I'm going to check it and check it and check it and check it, because I've seen how many times I've gotten things wrong, and I thought I was doing the best research that I could. But let's just take the Julia leaving John at Mimi's house thing. In the 1990s, when I'm writing the first book, should have been there, volume 1, I think that Julia left him because she could not cope with this precocious, brilliant little boy anymore. And she had her life to live with John Dykins, and John was like a third wheel. She couldn't deal with it anymore. And Mimi pressured her, and she relented and let Mimi have him. That is absolutely not true. I have got to go back and write that whole thing over because, again, the same aunt that gave John money to go to Paris calls Julia to her deathbed, Julia Baird, and says, I've got to tell you before I die the story of your mother. Your mother's heart was broken over having to give up John. That was her boy. She adored him. And Pop Stanley said, you're not raising that child anymore. You're living in sin. See, we're in a completely different era here. You're not married to John Dykins. You don't have a room for John to sleep in. You're playing your banjo at the pub on Smithdown Road. You're not home at night. That child is not being raised right. Mimi has a room for him. Mimi will make sure he goes to school, does his homework, goes to Sunday school. Mimi is getting that little boy, and he puts the thumb on Julia to leave him with Mimi where he can have his best life. She cried for years over this. She was brokenhearted, but she did what was best for her child. And we know now it wasn't what was best for her child, because he spends the rest of his life wailing at the microphones of the world about, I've got every reason on earth to be alternately mad and sad because I just lost the only girl I had. He's miserable. He wants the girl that got away, but history would have changed, Matt. History would have been completely different if John had known that his mother loved him and his mother wanted him. All he sees is, she's left me here at Mimi's, and look, she's got 2 children. She's got 2 girls. She wants them. So it's not children she doesn't love. It's me. She doesn't want me. I'm a nowhere man. I'm a loser, and I'm not what I appear to be. It changes everything. Had he known, it changes everything.
Well, I think it's hard to say. It's for me because if, let's say, he stayed with Julia, he could have been just as miserable, but for different reasons.
Could be.
Because she's clearly, I don't know. She had 2 other daughters, actually 3 other daughters. One was given up for adoption.
Right.
But
right.
So she was not the most stable of mothers. And John, being John, he did seem to thrive under Mimi's disciplinary upbringing in some ways, because his uncle George was very soft.
Yes.
And if it wasn't for him dying, that's another thing. Or how about this? If Mimi actually forwarded the letters that John's father had sent them over all those years, maybe he wouldn't be so hateful toward his father. Maybe there was something in those letters that may have turned him around.
Yeah.
There's a lot of what ifs, and all we got is what did happen, unfortunately. And fortunately for us, because quite possibly, if he stayed with Julia, maybe he never met Paul.
It would have changed the history of the world for sure. You're right. He would not, if he'd stayed with Julia, he would not have been determined. He would not have been as set on getting to the toppermost of the poppermost. He would not have been disciplined. Mimi gave him so many good things. He's half Mimi, and he loves Mimi, and he's half Julia. But the yearning that comes out in one song after another, Tell Me Why, Not a Second Time, I'll Cry Instead, all of those songs cry out for this person that left him. If I fell, I got to trust you because I've been left before. It's a recurrent theme in these songs, over and over again. I call your name, but you're not there. But you're right. He's got Uncle George, who is sweet to him and takes care of him and nurtures him and gives him love. So that's a good thing. maybe if he'd lived with Julia, he never would have been disciplined enough to write the catalog. All we know is that history would have been different. I mean, it would have changed it, but still I need to go back and fix should have been there so that people understand better what happened. But we didn't have that information. Mater hadn't called Julia Baird to her side and told her the story. We didn't know that. So as we go through history and we learn more, I agree with you 100%. You've got to be 40 or 50 years out from the event before the pieces start to fit together.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of the, like John's half sisters, I mean, I don't know how reliable they are. They seem to come with some agenda or kind of like a rewriting of history as well to make their mother not look so bad. And that's a slippery slope too.
It is. It is. I think that they are right about Julia wanting John, because multiple people say that she, he pretty much lives with her after George dies, Uncle George dies. He's there all the time. And John Dykens said, if you want him to move in, I'm fine with it. You can have him move in. And at that point, he's a teenager. And she says, no, I can't do that to Mimi. I mean, Mimi's raised him. I mean, I know my sister has the love of her life. It's her son, whom she adopted. And by the time that he was 2, our whole family, if his birth mother had wanted him back, it would have done all of us in. I mean, we all were so connected to him. He was the joy of our entire family. And I see what Julia's saying. I can't take him away from Mimi now. That he's all that she's got. And so it's a complicated story. To me, it's the most complicated story of the Beatles, although Ringo being in a sanitarium for as long as he was and being so sick and yet turning it into something so positive is a great story of triumph. And Paul endured the loss of his mother at a very early age, but the difference is that Paul had Jim and Mike. He had a nucleus of people who really adored him and loved him, and that's a different sort of life. John felt so alone, so abandoned. You're right, those letters from Fred, had he known that his dad wrote to him all the time, loved him, wanted him, only let him go because he felt like Julia would take him home and take care of him, and he should go with his mother. Has no idea that the little boy's going to be raised by Mimi. It's a complicated story.
Yeah.
It's a heartbreaking story.
Yeah, I always look at that time period, and there's a lot. It's been written many different ways, but generally we all know that John Lennon was the kid nobody wanted. And I mean, you could see from his point of view as a little kid and the damage that could do. So the problems he had in life, I always attribute to that deep resentment of having parents that didn't want him, or so he thought, which wasn't really true. But how would a kid know?
You wouldn't know. You wouldn't know. And when Mark Lewis and I have talked many times about this story that Billy Hall tells about Fred Lennon coming into the kitchen after the confrontation with Julia and saying, I did what was best for John. This is what he tells Billy Hall. I did what was best for John. I let him go with his mother. Okay. But the story that John told was quite different. The story John told was, they put me in between the two of them and they made me choose. That for a child is traumatic. And how you remember the past, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. How you remember the past is your reality.
Yeah.
And that's what he remembered, of not, this is all my fault. I chose my mom. I walked away from my dad. I chose my mom, but then I got left. And then she walked away and she left me here. And I'm not going to let that happen again. But what does he say over and over again in his songs all the way through his solo career? Number 1, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Number 2, I'll be a good boy. I'll be a good boy. It's all through his songs. Just love me. I won't screw up again. I won't screw up again. But he knows he's going to. Yeah, it's so complicated.
Yeah, I mean, the way and how old was he when they had that visit? Was
Four
he
and a half.
4.5? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Just
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it, I doubt that they left the decision to him because this was a custody issue. She traveled a great distance to get this settled. She brought her
yep.
live-in boyfriend with her. This was a serious matter that was going to
Yep.
be resolved, and they wouldn't let it to the decisions of a 4.5-year-old. I just
No.
don't see that. That doesn't make any sense. So
They may have
John,
asked him.
well, I don't see why they would. I think that the
Yeah.
decision was already made, and it's just a face-to-face, had to be done face-to-face.
Right.
And it seems to me that John just remembered it in a way that made it the worse for him because
Yep.
that's just how he felt because he felt nobody wanted him.
Right. Exactly. And if Mimi had been a little bit more loving, he had George, and that's great. George was he was a great father to him. But every day he would ask Mimi, she'd be waiting for him outside the school, and he would say, Mimi, why are you here every day when I get out? And every day she would say, because it is my duty to do so. Well, lady, that's the answer he wants.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, get a clue.
Yeah.
That's not the answer he wants. He doesn't want Mr. Presley, you are not. He doesn't want you'll never make a living with the guitar. He doesn't want all of this stuff, which boils down to, I don't love you, which she did. She loved him. But he wanted once in a while for someone to say something nice. And after George is gone, then there's Julia, and almost immediately she's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Stu, and then he's gone.
Yeah. How old was his Uncle George? How old was John when his Uncle George died? Was he like 12?
He's 15.
Oh, he was
But
15.
yeah,
Okay.
you remember at 15, though, that's right when you need that male understanding and that companionship and that role model. I mean, it's big.
Mm-hmm.
But and I'm sure everybody knows this story, John started laughing. They sent him away to Scotland. He's not there when George dies. They knew he was dying. He had cirrhosis. When he comes home, they've already had the funeral. George is already buried and gone. He didn't get to say goodbye. He didn't get to deal with it. And he starts laughing and he can't stop. And this goes on and hours and hours. And he's just he's lost it. And they call in his cousin to try to help him, and that doesn't do any good. And then finally, Mimi says, go get Julia. And Julia comes over, goes up to his room and says, look, I can't be George, but I will be the best. I will become your new best friend. You can come over to my house every day if you want to. We'll hang out. She just keeps talking, and gradually she brings him down. And that's what happens. I mean, from that day on, he's at her house. He's learning to play the banjo. She's telling him, you've got music in your bones. You're destined to do something great with music. I'm gifted. Your father is gifted. It's in you. You are going to be big in music. And she just feeds this to him along with ginger beer and cakes and dancing around the room. And she injects him with all of her spirit. He's had plenty of Mimi's spirit. And together, they say your formative years are before age 7. John grew so much during 15, 16, 17 as he absorbed Julia as well as he had absorbed Mimi, and becomes a combination of the two.
So he was lucky to have those friendship years with her, because
yeah.
that potentially could not have happened.
No.
I mean, maybe it would have been better if it didn't happen. I don't know. Hard to say. I mean, maybe he would have found a bond somewhere else that would have been more productive for him, and not didn't feel so much guilt.
It's possible. It's possible that it helped to assuage a little bit of the pain that he had felt. But once he loses her the second time, and this time irrevocably, he's broken after that. I mean, Cynthia says in her first book that he asked her constantly, you're not going to leave me, are you? You're not going to walk away, are you? Because I've had that happen to me before. I mean, it's like a theme. So
Mhm.
we hear that so much in the music. And because he always sang it to jaunty, up tempo melodies, you don't realize that he's telling you over and over again, hey, look, I've been abandoned. I've been left behind. I've been hurt. I love someone. They didn't want me. But it's the same story over and over again.
Yeah, and if Julia had lived, I bet he never would have hooked up with Yoko Ono.
Oh, the chances are, much enhanced by the fact that he's looking for someone who is out of the box,
Mhm.
bohemian, as Julia
Mhm.
was. She did outlandish things. Julia would put on a pair of glasses with no glass in them. And people, of course, would see this. They go into stores and she just had these rims on. And then she'd reach through and scratch her eye. Like, she was constantly having John shoplift toffees and do all kinds of pranks on the people in the stores. And she's just this free, crazy spirit. And so John's looking for outside of the box, artistic, um, someone who is strong, like all the Stanley women were, extremely strong, older than he is, even calls Yoko mother.
Mhm.
He is looking for that woman. Cynthia is not that woman. Cynthia is adoring, supportive. I'll do anything to make your dream come true. I'm behind you, but she's not mother. And she can't ever be that person.
This is very true. And unfortunately, John left her in a very abrupt way. And it just was, you could see the pain he was in. To do something so bad to somebody so lovely as Cynthia.
Yeah.
It would have
Yeah.
taken something very, like you said, out of the box,
Yeah.
something very different his world completely changed then. And he
Yeah.
was never quite
It's
the same, actually. He never quite
no,
came back.
no, I think it helped when May Pang um, brought the two of them together again and they were able to reconcile. And I honestly think that both of them, well, I know Cynthia did, but I think John also loved Cynthia really for the rest of his life. He just got off the rails. He just got to a point where he wanted one thing and she wanted something else. Once he takes LSD for the first time, when they go to the dentist house, George and Patty, John and Cynthia, and he takes it, it for him was a wonderful experience. It opened his feelings, it released his pain, it made him feel a part of something bigger than himself. Excuse me. And it really was good for him and good for George, but it was not good for Cynthia. And he encouraged her strongly in the summer of 1965 to try it again. And she didn't want to. She had a horrible trip, but she did. She tried it a second time. It was as bad as the first time. And she just said, John, you and I are headed down two different paths. He was increasingly taking drugs and she was increasingly pulling away from it. And she says in both of her books, if you want to know what broke John and I up, if you want to know what, it wasn't Yoko, she says it was drugs. He started hanging around with people who took drugs. He would bring them home late at night. He would not come home. He was definitely pulled away by the drugs. And I had a little boy to raise, and I wasn't about to participate in it.
Yeah.
It
Well,
was a
he's
part
not
of
the only one that happened to. I mean, it happened to plenty of rock stars for sure, but just a lot of people.
yeah,
And LSD was it's a game changer.
yeah,
It takes you somewhere else, but also lets other things in, and they're not all good things. So it's
yeah,
very dangerous. It can be.
yeah. And I see why Paul was reluctant to get involved in it. I mean, they just about badgered him to try it. And he kept saying, no, I don't want to. I'm not interested. I don't want to do it. I get it. It can be a thing. I remember driving with someone a few years ago. He was driving, and I was riding in the car, and he said, oh yeah, I've tried LSD several times. I'm like, pull the car over now, because you never know when you can have a flashback and you're not driving me anymore. And he's like, I'm like, pull over. But you really don't know when you go down that path where it's going to lead you. And for John, it took him straight away from Cynthia. They were having, by the time that he's writing It's Only Love on Rubber Soul, they are having trouble. And it does, I mean, goes on for 3 more years until finally, it splits. But during the time that they're getting divorced, he's not happy about it. I mean, they've been together 10 years when they end up getting a divorce. And she has been Larry Kane said that she is his piece, that she stabilized him. She bolstered him. She was his confidence. He called her every single night from the 1964 North American tour. He needed her to be his rock. And now they're breaking up. He's not only going to lose her, he's going to lose his son as well. He knows that. And he writes Your Blues. And it wasn't just a parody of a blues song. He says, outright, I thought about committing suicide. I was so depressed, I thought about committing suicide. He is very regretful of the fact that he and Cynthia are breaking up. And you remember after the episode with Yoko, where they stay up all night recording and make love as the sun comes up, he, 2 days later, he says to Cynthia, look, it meant nothing to me. It was just sex. Why don't you and I have a baby? If we have another baby, that will help. And she said, John, that's not going to help. You don't want me. You want someone like Yoko Ono, and I'm not that person. She was right. It had been going on for a long, long time, and they just couldn't find a way out of it.
And in the end, he didn't want somebody like Yoko Ono anyway. That didn't last.
No.
I mean, that lasted about from when they got married. It only lasted about 3 more years before she kicked him out.
Yeah.
And then he was just kind of washed up by the time she invited him back in, and we basically never heard from him again,
Yeah.
So it was over very early with Yoko Ono too. And people think it was just some unbelievable, wonderful love story, but it's like a lot of relationships that the honeymoon period is that for a while. And then you settle into who you are, and it gets to be how it gets to be.
Yeah.
And they weren't intimate after a certain point, and they had the kid, and that was it.
Yeah. Well, the very first year they're together, in fact, it's in the first 6 months that they're together. I think I've told you the story before. John says to her, look, you don't get it. Women serve me. Mimi always picked up after me. She made my food, and she made sure that I had what I needed. And Cynthia was quiet when I was asleep. She didn't make any noise so I could sleep. And you don't understand. You got to be quiet. You need to pick up this stuff around here. And why aren't you cooking for me? And Yoko says, oh, what? There's only one thing for it. I'll leave. You what? You're going to leave? You're going to leave me? That my worst fear in life, that you're going to leave me. I found my mother, and now you're leaving. And I mean, from that moment on, John doesn't need to be served anymore. He can take care of himself. He's capable of doing all the things for himself. And furthermore, he does not let her out of his sight. It's not that Yoko wants to pal around with him. It's that he won't let her out of his sight, because now he's scared to death that she is going to leave him.
Well, I think that's a key part to the relationship, is Ono figured this out very early on. That's how she controlled him, by threatening to leave him.
Yeah.
If Paul McCartney played that card with Lennon, it would have been different. If Cynthia played the card with Lennon, it would have been different. It's obvious. It's just that people aren't as diabolical to use that against Lennon. They loved him in a different way. But Yoko Ono, that's a recurring thing of control throughout their entire relationship.
Yeah. And being in the Bahamas, her calling and saying, I'll be there tomorrow at 10 a.m. And then she doesn't come. And then the next day, I'll be there at 2 p.m. And then she doesn't come. And it is. But, I don't think it would, like you say, it wouldn't have worked with Paul or Cynthia, because they aren't mother. It's mother who's leaving me again. Once again, I'm being abandoned by this woman, this out-of-the-box, bohemian, strong woman. She's leaving me. Are you kidding me? It's happening again. So it is it's a tale of chasing a hope for happiness. If I form a band, I'll be happy. If we record a song, I'll be happy. If we get a number one, I will be happy. Okay. If I take drugs, I'll be happy. No. If I change wives, I'll be happy. Yeah, it goes on. And Alan Williams called it John Lennon's next big thing. You're always chasing the next big thing. That's because the hole in his heart can't be filled by any of those things. That's not
right.
what's going to make him happy.
That's right. Yeah, he needed therapy very early on. The Primal Scream thing came a little late, and he never finished it. And that was kind of the pop psychology of the day. Wasn't, it's not practiced now. So I don't know what the long-term benefit would have been had he finished it anyway. But those were different times. People weren't. Well, that's not true, actually. There was a time when having an analyst was all the rage. With the wealthy or the upper middle class. That goes back into the 50s. So it wasn't completely frowned upon, but maybe it was for him. But I don't know that George Harrison said something in the anthology that always stuck with me. We didn't know how screwed up John Lennon was. Maybe they're just so used to him from such an early age. You get so close to it, you can't really see some things for what they are because you're so used to that and possibly being part of his personality. And they just lived with it. They treated him oftentimes. What is the word when you have a drug addict that you keep? I can't remember. Think of the word. They keep
like they're walking on eggshells all the time.
Well, like they let them get away with it. They enable. That's the word I'm looking for. Enable. Yeah. So I think people enabled Lennon all through just to get along with him and stuff because he had his quirks. And I think they just thought that was part of his personality. But as George said, we didn't know how screwed up he was. I think that screwed up part came with wisdom and years of understanding and living life and say, okay, this isn't right. Mm-hmm. And Lennon always knew something wasn't right, but he was incapable of really, after the Primal Scream thing, there was never any therapy sought so far as I've ever heard. Never been talked about for either him or Yoko, which is a shame.
Yeah. Well, he tried to rely upon himself. Even with primal therapy, he tried to find the strength within himself to be strong enough to endure this. I'm gonna sing about it. I'm gonna get it out. I'm gonna tell you my story. I'm gonna get it out. I'm gonna tell it to you again. I'm gonna get it out, and then I'm gonna be funny, or I'm gonna be successful. Or he kept trying to find a way. And it's funny that you bring up that quote. I just read that quote in anthology like last night because I'm doing some research on Revolver, and it's in when the Beatles are making Revolver. That's how late George Harrison said that. They are well into 66, and he's saying that. And George found out very quickly that if he wanted to be whole and happy, he had to have something bigger than himself. He couldn't find it in George Harrison, and he couldn't find it in money, and he couldn't find it in power, and he couldn't find it in sex, and he couldn't find it. It had to be something bigger than George Harrison. John spent a lot of time trying to cure it himself, and he never had the wherewithal to do it.
Well, I think he tried to medicate with drugs was the main thing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what he did aside from that, really.
Well, I mean, all the songs are very confessional. They're very much, he so reminds me, I've said this before, of the Ancient Mariner in Coleridge's poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. This guy has caused all these people, he thinks, because he shot an albatross, that he caused everyone on the ship to die. Well, of course, he didn't cause everyone to die, but he thinks that. And so he spends the rest of his life telling everybody the story, grabs them, and he tells them the story. And that's what John's doing. He's trying to tell you over and over the sad story of his life and to get it out of his life. But it just doesn't seem to work. And neither do the drugs, and neither does fame, and neither does anything. It's not going to heal what has happened. And Stu, the loss of Stu, the Beatles never talked about Stu. That was an unspoken topic, because that would set John into a depression for days.
Mhm.
That was his last straw. So I've lost my parents, and then my dad comes to get me, and then I lose my dad, and he never writes to me again or looks back or ever comes to see me again, so he thinks. And then I lose Uncle George, who's the only person that shows me any love. And then my mom comes back into my life, and we're best friends, and then I lose her. This is my last stand, okay? I love Stu. He's my brother. He's my soulmate. He's my confidant. He is everything. And then he loses Stu. And you can see why he's hard shelled. You have to be.
Mm-hmm. But he never lost McCartney.
Yeah, but
Why did he ditch on McCartney? Why did he ditch McCartney then?
They aren't really
Think of the timing.
buddies.
Think of the
Yeah.
timing. I don't know. I don't know about that. I mean, talk about an equal rival. I mean, there's
Yeah.
very few other rivals he had in the industry or otherwise, but he didn't like I say, I think that had Paul done the leaving, I think that would have been the problem for Lennon.
Yeah. 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 And when John goes on holiday throughout the Beatles years, throughout the years, he goes with George. I mean, George was always his little brother, hung around with him, idolized him. They always are together. They sit together on the plane. You could look at pictures. Unless Paul and John are working on something, they rarely sit. They never room together. They respect each other. They get along with each other sometimes. They spur each other on to be bigger and better than they would have been if they had met each other. I mean, they changed each other's lives, but they're not really like buddy. And I don't think he sees Paul as an outlet for his pain. There is that time in Key West that Paul writes about when they're delayed because of Hurricane Dora from going into Jacksonville. They fly into Key West. They take whatever they took to drink and went down on the beach and talked that night. And that's the time we cried that Paul writes about. But other than that one night, they just don't, it's not their role together. That's not their, come on, let's go talk about our problems kind of thing.
But he wasn't like that with anybody, really. I mean, he had his kind of gang around. And when he took drugs, like with Derek Taylor, some of these other people, that he might fall into that a bit. But with Paul, I think he got past that with him, and that those things had been done already. And he moved to the next stage with Paul.
Yeah, I don't know. They don't ever come across to me as ever being buddy, not even in the early years. They're not sharing, well, my mom died, well, your mom died. They are working on songs, and they're lifting each other up, and they're looking to tomorrow instead of yesterday. And it's a different relationship, but who he shares it with, who he confides in, and who he really lets into his heart is you and me. We're the ones he tells his story to. We don't listen. True. We don't know it. We don't know he's telling us, but we're the ones he's confiding in over and over again.
Very true. That's true. I mean, in his lyrics, he can't write about anything other than himself, really. I mean, it's really kind of funny when you think about it.
Yeah. Klaus Berling interviewed them in Bournemouth in August of 1963. And they've just written She Loves You. It's gone to the top of the charts. And he asked John about it. And John says, that's Paul. Paul writes songs about other things, but I'm more biographical. I only write about myself. Yeah. It's true.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
I don't want to spoil the party. All this fun, Beatlemania, charade, everything's cool, everything's great. It's the Beatles. I don't want to spoil it, but I'll go. I would hate my disappointment to show. She doesn't love me. She left me. He tells you in every song, if you just listen to him, he's telling you how screwed up his life is, how sad he is. And people just were like tapping their toes to help and dancing and bebopping and never hearing the man telling you, help.
Mm-hmm.
Would you please help me?
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yes.
mean, he couldn't find it within himself, unfortunately.
No.
I never thought he looked for the answers within himself. I think he always looked outside of himself. And that's
Yeah.
where Yoko Ono, I thought, came in
Yeah.
because he just allowed himself to she just ran everything. He just was, by that time, he just
Yeah.
didn't either care, or he was just too burnt out, or that's to me was the shame, is those final years, where he was doing virtually nothing. And it
Yeah.
didn't seem like he was there because he needed the break. It seemed like he was there because he was just washed up,
Well,
drug
in John
addled, and
Lennon,
just kind of a lost soul.
yeah, John Lennon 1980, Ken Womack's book was a real revelation for me because I'm not there yet. I know what I know, but I do
I can't
extensive
wait for it to
research.
get there, by the way. We got some discussions to have here.
Yeah, boy, we do. We definitely do.
They're only in
But
1965.
I know. Just getting into 1966. I really learned from Ken Womack how much John was working behind the scenes, which I didn't realize. Like, he wrote Watching the Wheels over 10 years. I mean, it literally took him 10 years to write that song. It started off and then it changed and then it morphed and then he added this and then he did that. So he was working throughout that period that appears to be very fallow. And of course, there's some great albums, Walls and Bridges, I know everybody loves, and Double Fantasy and all that. You and I've laughed 50 times since you and I talked a few days ago about the fact that I love Sometime in New York City and you hate Sometime in New York City. We just, he was working, but he was not working on himself anymore. That he, after the primal screen therapy, he's pretty much not working on John anymore. But May Pang, that's a whole different story, because May Pang could not have been more inspirational, more healing, more enabling, not in a bad way, but in a good way. She enabled him to believe in himself again. He comes to her thinking he's washed up. He comes to her thinking he's got no more songs to write, and that he is, he's pretty much just second rate. By the time that he goes back to Dakota that night that she begs him not to go, he believes in himself again. It enables him to create Double Fantasy, and he keeps seeing May. It's not like he gives her up. He sees her the rest of his life. She was one of the most positive forces in his entire life.
Hey, have you seen the new documentary?
Oh, yeah.
How did you like it?
Love it. Love it. It is a scrapbook that comes to life. Artistically done, beautifully layered, tells her story, long overdue. People don't realize what a heroine she was in that story, how much she touched and changed his life and healed the relationship between Julian and John, healed the relationship between Cynthia and John, brought him back into himself, recentered him. I mean, she is a major player and she's been overlooked because people call it the lost weekend. Okay, 18 months isn't a weekend, people. It's not a weekend.
Well, that's because John Lennon called it that, and people just take everything he says as gospel. They take it literally, and it's like, if he had not used that phrase, unfortunately, Lennon is his own worst enemy many of the times.
Yeah, it was just, it was a very important part of his life, and they only think about the Harry Nilsson incident, the Smothers incident. There was so much more than that. There were so many good times and happy times and productive times. And she was a game changer, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was glad to see her do that documentary, although I've not seen it yet. It's hard. I can't find it anywhere. It had such a limited release, and I don't know if it's going to be released commercially, on a DVD or something, but because it came out last fall, I believe.
Yeah. So, and then it came out again a couple of weeks ago, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, only in limited theaters. And of course, Freeport, Louisiana is not one of the places that it played. But very fortunately, we got to see it when it came out last fall, and were able to watch it and enjoy it then.
Yeah.
When I think it was out for like 2 or 3 weeks, and you could get it and watch it on your laptop or cast it to your TV or whatever. But you will love it, Matt. It is so beautifully done.
Yeah, I was just looking for it this week. As a matter of fact, I came across a couple of things, and I can't find it anywhere to watch. So I kind of missed the limited release apparently, and
Yeah.
I've been kind of busy lately, but I'll catch up with
you
that at some
have.
point. But yeah, May Pang is one of the few people that entered the solo Beatles story. That's a really, what's the word? Just a sweet person that wasn't out to get something off of them, you know.
No.
And it's a shame that she's gotten excised from a lot of the history, and that's too bad. But I think she's left a pretty good. She's written a couple books, and now with this documentary, and everybody loves her. So I mean, that's a rare thing in the Beatle world, where she's pretty much loved by everybody except for one person, you know. So but yeah, that's could be worse.
And she deserves it. I mean, there's some people that like, you know, everybody adored Bob Wooler, and I was kind of afraid to meet him because I thought, oh boy, I don't know, am I going to like him or not? Because John obviously at one point wasn't too happy with him, but he was so lovable. He was so charismatic and sweet, and brought me all kinds of little, I'll show you, here are a couple of the little things. He wrote a poem that went to Oh Danny Boy, called Oh Liverpool, and he brought me a copy of it and signed it on the back. I don't know if I can get there where you can see it. He brought me another one that he did to the tune of Are You Going to Scarborough Fair, which is called Are You Going to Strawberry Fields. He brought me a card that you used to give to the DJ at the Cavern Club if you wanted to request a song. You had to fill out what the name of the song was and who the artist was, and give it to the DJ. And he brought me one of those. He was one of those sweet people that just wanted to, he was very generous with his time. And I will say that after I had my interview with him, we walked out of the restaurant where we were together for lunch in Lark, Liverpool, and there on the sidewalk, by some weird coincidence, was Alan Williams, for those that don't know, the Beatles' first manager. And Bob was like, Alan, what a strange thing to see you here. Well, good to see you, Bob. Why don't the four of us go over to Keith's Wine Bar and sit and talk? They totally had that plan. And we were there for about another 4 hours. And of course, the bill did not go to Bob or to Alan.
Yeah.
But it was an afternoon to remember.
They're still living off the Beatles.
Yeah. Yes.
Of course, I guess we all are, aren't we, Jude?
Yeah. But it was great. But that was kind of, you know, there's some people in the story that are just sweet, and you love being around them. And Bob was one of those people. But May Pang, I have been around May many times, and she is nothing but, she doesn't want to promote herself. That's not it at all. She wants to promote what John was when he was with her, and to straighten the story out. He's not a drunkard that's causing trouble. Yeah, he got some trouble, but this was a very productive period in his life.
Very much so. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. And we need to say, this is what happened. Let's get the record straight. And that's what she's doing.
Well, good. There's a lot of, I'm glad that she's still around to do that. I think that's, I've seen the trailer, and it looks very, very well done.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to see it. And maybe I'll get a chance to meet her someday.
Oh, you would love her. I don't think she'll ever be at a fest, but she, maybe at Abbey Road on the River sometime, or I don't know if you've ever been to Fab Fest in North Carolina. It's really growing in popularity. She might be invited to that. So we're just keeping our fingers crossed that we see you in Chicago.
Okay. One person at a time, huh?
Yeah.
I'm the low-hanging fruit. Well, very good. Well, let's end it there, Jude. I really appreciate you coming on, and you've got your next volume is 1965 to 1966, which you think it'll be out next year?
It will be out in October 2024.
Okay.
It takes me 3.5 years to do each book. And I've just gotten the boys home from the 1965 North American tour. That was grueling because Shea Stadium is one of those events. Meeting Elvis, another huge, like I said, 3 months just to do the research, much less write it and edit it and all that. And then I had no idea that the Beatles were almost killed, both in Houston and San Francisco. San Francisco was such a horrible event that they stopped both the afternoon shows and the evening shows. People were all over the stage. I've never seen anything like it. And so the Beatles leave America at the end of the 65 tour saying, yeah, look, we can't do this anymore. This is so dangerous. This is so dangerous. And yet Brian sends them back in 66, which, as you know, is Tony Barrow called 1966 tour a watershed moment for the Beatles.
Yeah.
It was just horrible, and they should never have been sent out again. But I've got them headed back to make Rubber Soul. I've been spending weeks doing the Rubber Soul research. And so we get ready to go in the studio, working hard on it.
Oh, good. Very good. I've got a pretty long list of stuff to do myself. So, you know, we are both noses to the grindstone.
That's right. You got that right. Well, congratulations to you on the upcoming wedding and many happy years together.
Thank you. Yes, this video I think will hit just before the big day. So might be a lull after that for a bit, but I'll be back on my horse again here soon and with more videos to come.
I love it. I love it. Well, it's always a joy chatting with you. You know so much. It's a good thing that we don't live close together, because we would have to get together over a Starbucks and talk Beatles.
Oh, well, we may do that at some point. At some point we'll have to do that, but that'd be great. But until then, we'll get back to work here, and we'll just catch up again when the next book is ready, or whenever. You know, we can do this anytime.
That sounds great. Thank you very much for having me back on.
Okay, thanks, Jude. Good seeing you.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm a loser. I'm a loser. I want